Hi everybody, welcome back to Small Caliber Arms Review. I'm Richard and we're going to do another holster today. And this is the previous one I done from Crossfire Trail with Tom Selleck. This is the one that holds this Schofield. Now I do have a top coat on it now. Some of you have said something about me not putting anything on it after the last video, but I did do that. I treated it with Atom Balm, leather balm with Atom Wax, and the thongs, the apron tie and the hammer thong, I treated those with neat's foot oil. So hopefully it'll keep them nice and soft and pliable and everything, because they need to move around a little bit. At least the hammer thong does. So it's all nice and finished up. But now we're going to do the other holster that Tom Selleck wore in Crossfire Trail, and that's the one for the 1872 open top. And that's the 1872 open top right here. I did change the grips out. These are some grips that come on another gun. His grips were a ivory grips on there, which these, I did make a set of ivory grips, but they do not fit this gun perfectly, so I may have to make another set just to fit this one. But this was the closest thing I had anyways. So he carries this one on his left side. It's a cross draw, and it is a Mexican loop style holster, but it's 3 straps on it instead of the 1 strap that's on the Schofield holster. So I've been tinkering around with the pattern on this thing, and it's a little bit trickier, not too much, but there's a full apron on the back side of it. The firearm that he carries in there is pretty long for the holster. There is a couple scenes where you can see the holster or the barrel of the gun sticking out just past the end of the holster. And his gun is very deep set into it. The way I've got it sitting there right now with the top of it coming up higher than the grips is about like his was in there. There is going to be a little bit of a welt in here. I did find a scene that it looks like there may be a tiny bit of a welt in the gun, so I'm just going to put a thin one in here. And one of the things I did a little bit different with this pattern when I was coming up with it that I normally didn't do was holster material, the leather is going to be a little thicker than paper, so that kind of throws me off sometimes. So I took a piece of leather that I'm going to use for the holster, same thickness and everything, actually from the same piece. It was some scraps left over from the Schofield holster. And I put it around the gun at some of the thicker points on there so that I could go ahead and figure out the length of it. So I took this and I wrapped it around there and I marked the center on there so that I could see, okay, that's about the top center of the gun, and then closed it up to see where it would fit on there. Now this gun is a little bit wider with the 1872 open top. It comes apart just like the old black powder ones did. It still has the barrel wedge in it, and so the barrel comes off the front there. This is a cylinder conversion. Well, it's not a cylinder conversion. It's an 1872 open top, which is, this is the way they made them. But it's kind of like they use their old tooling to make this. So it does have a loading gate on it, but it still has the barrel wedge on it and everything. It does not have the loading arm on it. It does have an ejector on there. So we're going to take this thing and make a holster for it. Try to get as close as I can to the Crossfire Trail holster that he wore in there. One thing I do notice on this gun is when he wears it on that belt has cartridge loops that go 3/4 of the way around it. So it opens up pretty wide where it goes across the belt because it does fit over top of the cartridge loops. So I need to make this just a little bit longer on here so that I've got more material there. So I'll walk you through that little part of it, how I'm going to make it longer without redoing a whole new pattern, because I think, keep my fingers crossed, this one will work the way it's supposed to work. Okay, so one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to get this pulled back out of there, get it opened up. Now I want to make the apron, the area between the holster and the apron, a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut it, and then I'm going to put it back together. So I'll take a straight edge here and cut me a nice straight line across there. So now I've disconnected the apron from the back of it, and I'm just going to take another piece of paper here. I'm thinking I'm going to make it about, oh, I'd say a 1/2 inch wider, maybe somewhere around there, just so I can get it, you know, hopefully closer to what it needs to be. So my little tape measure here, or my little ruler here is 1/2 inch wide. So what I'm going to do is establish another nice straight edge. I don't think that's straight. Let's make it straight. I'm just going to cut a 1/2 inch wide strip of paper, the same paper I used for the patterns. And I'm going to piece it in there. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. All right, now if you've seen some of the other patterns I've made, you've probably seen masking tape all over them, because sometimes that's what it takes to get it right. Let's try getting the tape right first. Now all I got to do is take my little strip that I cut and match it up. And then go ahead and stick this back on there. Now all I got to do is get my curves to match back up, because the points there aren't quite right. So I will be trimming this. Oh, just try to keep the contours pretty close to being the same. Now I'll stick another piece of tape on this side. And then everything should work out correctly again. Now the holster itself is not going to go down in farther than what it did before, just because of the width of the holster and the width of the slots I got on the Mexican loops there. So now you can see I've got a lot bigger opening on the back here. I could fold it down. I don't want to do that. I don't want it to be like that on the regular holster either, but it is going to have to open up in there some. So that's going to close some of that up, but it's going to have to be rounded. It can't sit flat like that, so the gun's got to be able to go in there. And that should give me a lot more room for the belt to slide through there with the cartridge loops on it, because this side he does have over top of the cartridge loops. And leather's going to be a little more flexible than this paper is. But anyways, like I said, I think I've got this one made correctly, even adding that little 1/2 inch strip in there. So the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get this thing cut out of leather and keep my fingers crossed and hope it comes out right. All right, this is the same piece of leather I cut the other holster from, the Schofield one. And one of the things I've noticed about it, it might be hard to see on the camera, but right through here is a definite line where it's not a shadow or anything, but from this line this way, it's a little bit lighter than it is this way. The other holster I cut out from right down here somewhere, so I'm gonna cut this right on that line, because my pattern fits pretty good right in there, and the back side of it looks pretty good too. It's not terribly rough, it's not super smooth, but it'll work. So I'm going to cut it right on that line, or at least pretty close to it. And one of the things that'll keep me from doing is if I have to, if I go to make another pattern, it'll keep me from maybe crossing that line and getting two different shades of whatever color I dye it. And it's probably time for a new blade on the old knife too. All right, it'll make it a little easier to work with this piece here. Now they've got quite a bit of pieces here that I can use for other things too, and it makes this one a little bit easier to put away. All right, I get my little fine ballpoint pen and make sure I've got it positioned right, make sure there's no serious marks on this thing that'll show up through there. Get a little bit of weight here to put on top of it. Get it all held down nice and flat, and then get to tracing. All right, now it's time to get to cutting this thing out. That'll make it a little easier to get that curve, because with a wider blade like that, trying to get a tight radius makes it really difficult. Now, since I don't have a punch with that big of a radius or one that size, I'm going to cut through a couple passes. That way I'm only getting the point of the blade down in there and not twisting the leather around any. And once I've made it through that tighter radius, I can go ahead and push the blade down through the leather. Go ahead and try this knife. It's got a nice tight hook on it there. Maybe that'll help me out some. And there we go. Now all I got to do is cut out these little slots there for the Mexican loops, and hey, I've got another pattern. All right, when you're cutting out those slots in between there, use a straight edge, but do not cut from the farthest hole all the way over to the nearest hole, because if you overshoot that, you'll put a cut on the back side of that, and that will not look good at all. So what I'm going to do is put my straight edge on there and cut most of the way across. And I'm going to do it in a couple passes because I don't want to risk pushing my straight edge away. Now I'll turn around the other way and cut away from the hole towards the other hole. All right, now that I got the whole thing cut out, the next thing I got to do is got to get it cased, and I got to get some lines on this thing. Now on the Schofield holster, the pattern that was on there was a camouflage tool, and it was the rounded parts were pointed towards the inside of the holster. On this one, it's a camouflage tool, but they're pointed away. The rounded parts are toward the outside of the holster. So I got to establish my stitch groove on there, which will probably be about 3/16 of an inch. And then I'm going to do another line in a little bit farther once I establish where that needs to be. And I'll take a scrap piece of leather and do my aligning on there so I get my measurements right. And then that camouflage tool will be the other way on there. It'll follow that line, but they'll be toward the outside of the holster. Around the apron part of it, there is no camouflage tool. There's just the stitch groove. And then on each one of the loops that goes on here, there is a groove all the way around that. Again, as far as I could tell in the movie, no pattern on those, only the stitch groove, and the pattern is only on the body of the holster itself. Okay, so I took a little scrap piece here and I kind of laid out what I thought was the pattern from the holster. So I've got a 3/16 inch stitch groove on the edge of it there. And then I came in 5/8 of an inch and put a really, really light line in there. Now, one of the things I did do was I do not want that line to show up. It's one of the reasons I did it really light. And another thing is with my camouflage tool, I actually went down below that line just enough to cover that line up with the pattern of the stamping tool itself. So we won't be able to see that line on there, and it should look nice and professional, I hope anyways. So the next thing I got to do is get a little water on this thing and let it soak. I also went ahead and cut out a welt, and I cut it out of the same material that I cut the holster out of, same thickness, which should be 7 to 8 ounce, somewhere around there. And I'm going to put it just right on the edge there, and then I taper it off about where that first loop starts, and then it goes away back down to its normal thickness. That'll give me just a little more room on the inside up at the top, which I don't think I need. I hope not, but it'll also just not be really, really thick there at the edge of it anyways, because in the movie, his isn't like that. There is this part in there, a scene in there where he has it over his shoulder, and you can see that spine part of it right there, and you can tell it's, I think, a little bit thicker than just the 2 layers. So that'll be 3 layers there. So now I'm going to get this thing wet down and then let it sit for a little bit so that the water can soak into it, and then we'll start doing the stitch groove and then the stamping. Again, this is going to be dyed brown, So I am going to wet the whole thing down, even where I'm not going to be putting any designs in there. And that's just because I don't want it to, when I dye it, I don't want it to have different colors. And I've noticed that water will sometimes do that. Maybe it was still damp when I did the other holsters, but I want to make sure that everything is as even as I can get it. Now, I don't want it soaking wet, I don't want it mushy, but I am going to get it pretty wet so the stamps will go in there pretty deep, but I'm going to let it dry out a little bit and kind of firm up. That's why I like only doing one side of it. If I can get that top side of it soft and the bottom side of it is still pretty dense, less chance of me damaging that lower layer. At least that's my theory anyways. All right, we'll let that rest a little bit and then we'll get to doing the stitch grooves and the stamps. Okay, I had to practice a little bit. I got a couple extra stamps here that I picked up this weekend. I got to do the wrist cuffs too, and I believe I got the correct stamp for the wrist cuffs. Just practicing while I had this piece out. Now, this piece should be just about ready. Yeah, I think that's pretty good right there. And we're going to go ahead and get the stitch groovers set up for the 3/16 first. And I'll check that against my practice piece here. Yeah, it's a little bit off. There we go. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and get that stitch groove all the way around this thing and including on the loops there. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and do the loops first. Now all I'm going to do is put this in the slot and go all the way around it, and that'll take care of the loops. Now they don't actually get stitched, but it's just a little, you know, decorative feature on there. Now I like to do all of my stitch grooving before I do any of my beveling, because that crisp corner on the edge there makes it a lot easier to keep this tool from slipping off there. All right, now we'll go ahead and go around the whole outside of the holster. We want to be careful up here in this corner where we come to a point so we don't cross them over. We want them to meet right at a nice little point. And there we go, we got the stitch groove all the way around it. Now the other one, I'm going to set this at 5/8 of an inch. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and use this because it's easier when I do it on here because it's exactly what I set up the first time anyways. All right. Now on this part, it's a little tricky to see what's going on up in here. This is going to overlap if I go all the way up there. So I need to find out where these 2 points are going to meet. Say here and here. Now I apologize if you can't see these lines here. Like I said, I'm doing them very, very lightly. Now there's some stamping that continues up into that point right there, and I'm not going to draw a line up there, and I'm not exactly sure what those stamps are that are used up in there, but I did pick up a couple geometric shapes. I can do something up there to hopefully give it the look. And then I'm going to continue this line, like I said, very lightly, even though I'm going to stamp over it so it's not really noticed. And I'm only going to go a little bit past my midway point because that's where I'm going to stop my stamps at. As this is folded over, you're never going to be able to see that. It'll be tucked inside of there and none of that stamping is going to show up in there. I might go just a little bit farther. And on this side, I'm going to continue that line around. Again, very lightly. And I'm going to come up the back side just a little bit, same thing, it's not going to be seen. so I'm not going to stamp any farther than that. Now that I've got that line on there, I'm going to go ahead and get the stamping on the camouflage tool. Since it's already cased and it's ready to go, I'll get my stone back over here. And something like this really helps out if you're doing it on a wood tabletop like this. Your stamps are not going to have good definition to them. They're going to be dull, so you don't want to do that. So now I'm going to start, I think I'm going to start in this corner here and then end up where I end up. If I come this way and end at the corner, it could come out looking not so good anyways. Oh, I almost did that wrong. Whew. Like I said, the stamp on this goes to the outside, not the inside of the holster. Okay, now I did not punch any holes for a hammer thong in here because I cannot see anywhere where he has a hammer thong on this holster. There probably is one, and if there is, it might just be a simple one. And I think I think I'll put one in there, but I'm going to do it just like the ones on the Flames of Hell rig, where it goes through there and it's not really, it's kind of a blood knot, but it's more of a lock. It's actually two separate pieces that kind of lace together in there. So yeah, I think I might go ahead and do that. I will put a couple holes in there and put me a hammer thong on this thing. Surely he does. Most of the time in the movie, when you notice him wearing this particular holster, he's on horseback. Because it is a cross draw, and the way you sit on a horse, it's more comfortable to have it over there. It's easier to get to and pull the firearm out. I'm pretty sure he had to have had a hammer thong on there because he wears this one most of the time when he's riding. You'll see throughout the movie he'll have either one on or the other, and then a few times he'll have both of them on, especially at the gunfight at the end of the movie. And for those of you who did watch the movie, I hope you agreed with me it was a good movie. I know somebody did comment they just watched it and they liked it. I did too. So I'm going to let this thing dry out even more now because I'm going to bevel the edges on it, and when I bevel the edges, I like to do it when it's nice and dry. When it's wet, it seems to maybe push the leather around a little bit more, and I might go ahead and sharpen up my beveling tool too because it's been a while since I've done it and it could use it. Okay, I've got my beveling tool all sharpened up, but what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and punch the holes for the stitches. Still just a little bit damp, not too damp for punching the holes in there anyways. Now this one is pretty cool because there's no toe plug in it. Like I said, I like the looks of a toe plug, I just hate doing them, and the stitching does not go that far down at the bottom, not like it did on the Schofield one. It just barely makes a curve, and that's it. So I'm going to start up here at the point and put my first punch marks in there, my first holes in there. Now, one of the things I do when I'm doing this is if there is any curve to it whatsoever to that stitch line, I only use a two-prong punch, and I'm only actually punching one hole at a time because my first one I'm putting in the last hole, and that sets my spacing on there so it's all nice and even. So I'll put my first tine in the last hole I did and then go ahead and punch one hole. Yes, it takes a lot longer to do it, and one of these days I may actually go ahead and invest in a sewing machine because for a seam like this would be great for it. Now I will have to punch these holes more than once also because I need to put my welt in there, and the prongs on here are only so long, so it makes it a little tough to get it through 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. So this wouldn't be too bad since the welt is pretty thin, but I'm going to go ahead and punch them. That'll set my spacing on there, and then when I put the welt on there, I'll have to punch them again. First tine, last hole, and just keep on going. If you do have a straight area, something that you know is straight, maybe you actually drew that line on there with a straight edge, but this was all hand curved on there, even down at the bottom, it's not perfectly straight. Then you can use a 4-prong or a 6-prong punch, and it won't be bad. It'll actually help you out a little bit because the better your lines look, the better your stitching looks on there. So if I do this one hole at a time and I maintain that gentle curve that's on there, then my stitches will maintain a gentle curve on there too. I don't want, if I was to put a 4-prong punch on here, then you're going to see a straight line, a straight line, a straight line navigating that corner, and you don't want that. You want it to flow just as nicely as the leather does. Okay, I've got all my stitching holes punched in. Like I said, they don't come all the way across the bottom, so that's cool. Now I'm going to go ahead and get my welt glued on there. And I already got it marked out there, so I'm going to take a little bit of, this is Weldwood contact cement. I've already got the leather roughed up on the smooth side, so I'm going to get a little bit of this put on there. I like contact cement. I think it's an excellent bonding agent, glue, adhesive, whatever you want to call it. It really works well. And like I said, this is kind of a short welt that's in here, so it's not going to take much. I already got it skived down to, pretty much to nothing at the end of it there. And it's not going to take a lot of contact cement. It's not going to take a lot of space up in here either. A little bit more on there for the welt. You have to put it on both sides of the piece that you're putting on there. All right, once you've got both sides of it coated, you need to let that dry a little bit. It'll tack up. It's a little sticky and wet right now. Give it about 10, 15 minutes. I think you've got up to like 45 minutes to stick the two pieces together. Not over 2 hours. It says let dry until glossy. 15 minutes, but not over 2 hours. So we'll give it about 15 minutes. We'll stick this on there. We'll line up that outside edge there. Maybe even have the welt hang over just a little bit because I can sand that off and slick it down and everything. But we're going to let that dry up a little bit and then we'll get it put on there. And then I'm going to re-punch those holes so that I can make my needle go through there a little bit easier. Okay, that's all dried up now. It's time to put the welt on there. Try to get this lined up the best I can. Okay, now I did want it to hang over just a little bit from the edge of the holster itself because I want to be able to have something there to sand off. If I've got it inside, then it's going to create a divot in there and I don't want that. So now I've got to get my stone back over here and punch those holes again. Luckily, I've only got to punch a few of them. Okay, now I've got all the holes punched in there. I'm going to do a little bit different this time. I'm going to, I got to finish my beveling, the edges around the loops, the outside of it and everything, and then I'm going to go ahead and dye it flat, and then I'm going to go ahead and treat it with some neat's foot oil before I fold this thing up and sew it, because the water from casing it kind of diminishes some of the oils, the natural oils that are in the leather, and when I dye it, it's an alcohol-based dye, so that might destroy a little bit of the oils in there too. So dye it and then neat's foot oil, and then we'll get this thing folded up and get it sewn together. All right, now some of this is going to get beveled on both sides. Where it is not going to get beveled on both sides is where I'm going to stitch it together. Everywhere else it will. Maybe not the back of the loops there though. So in between my stitch marks on here, my punch marks, that way I've got a nice rounded edge on there, and then definitely at the top of it. Okay, one of the things I am going to do, this is the same light brown dye that I used on the other holster, and both of the holsters are pretty close. This one may be just a tad lighter, but what I'm going to do is, if I can find my screwdriver, I'm going to thin this out a little bit with some denatured alcohol, because it is an alcohol-based dye, and I've only got a little bit left in this bottle, so I'm going to maybe reduce it by 25% or so. And hopefully that'll give me a little bit lighter color on the dye. And this is just a guess. And when I do the neat's foot oil over top of it, hopefully that will make it a little bit darker so that everything kind of matches up. I'm okay if this one comes out just a tad bit lighter, because I kind of want it a little bit lighter. So I'm going to get my gloves on here. This is going to be somewhat messy, like it always is. I'm going to put it on with a wool applicator, my Merkin, same one I used last time. And we're going to go ahead and do the back side of it first, and I'm going to try to avoid the areas where the glue is going to go, because I'm not gluing this one first. I do have my paper down with plastic underneath it, and I'm going to get this thing dyed up. The back side of it is going to suck up a whole lot more dye than the front side will, and I'm going to try to get it even. Also, try to avoid the glued part as much as I can. Not too worried about not getting the inside of it nice and evenly dyed, because that doesn't show anyways. All right, now for the side that's going to be seen. All right, now for the thing that takes the most time when doing any holster is drying time. I want to make sure these edges are gotten really well. It tends to soak in there quite a bit, and they tend to lighten out first, but I want to make sure that it's all coated really well. And I can go back in and touch it up a little bit when it's done. If they're not as dark as I want them, it's not a problem. All right, drying time. Okay, it looks to me like the holster's good and dry. It's actually curled up a little bit too, so hopefully this will, I just spit on it a little bit. Hopefully this will soften it back up again. It is a little stiff now that it's dried out, so let's try to get some moisture and oils back into this thing. Now I'm going to use neat's foot oil. This is Phoebing's 100% pure neat's foot oil, and I'm just going to put it on a another Merkin. And we'll see what it does. Hopefully it does what it's supposed to do and makes it nice. A little fuzz coming off the Merkin here. Get it all worked into there, into everywhere. And again, it's going to have to dry out. So this will take a while. And I probably should have done like I normally do and do the backside first. It really should not have any effect on the dye itself, being an oil-based dye. And I'm putting more oil on it, so who knows? I don't know. Again, I want to try to avoid getting it in the area where I'm going to glue. That's the only bad part about this, what I'm trying to do here anyways. Now hopefully this will just be replenishing the oils that have been sucked out of it by the water and the dye. And hopefully it'll lighten back up like it was before, because that's really how I want it. And I've seen other people do this and their holsters come out great. This is the first time I've done it like this, so I'm hoping that it'll come out just like theirs do. Make sure I get it in the edges, and again, try not to get too much of it where the glue is going to go. Now, if I'm replenishing the oils that were sucked out of it, then, I mean, there were already oils in it, right? So hopefully, it'll still glue together. All right, going to see how that does. Okay, it's had overnight to dry, and I've always told my wife for years, stick with what you know, and I didn't take my own advice on this. Here it is. it's been drying overnight, so approximately 12 hours or so, and it has lightened up a little bit in spots, but it is not as light as I would like it. Hopefully it will lighten up some more over time as it dries out a little bit. It's almost given it a little bit of a pull-up effect, because when I bend it or push on it, you'll see it'll lighten up a little bit, but it's not where I want it. I wanted it like it was when it dried out after the water, and I should have stuck to what I knew and just went ahead and put the leather balm with Atom Wax on it, because then it would have come out a lot closer to what I wanted the color to be. Like I said, hopefully it'll dry out to about this shade down here. So the next thing I'm going to do, I already got my holes punched in there for the hammer thong. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get this thing, get the edges slicked up, and then get to sewing it together. I'm going to use gum track on it because I have Tokonole, but I like gum track a lot better than I do Tokonole. So anyways, it's a little easier to slick this up when it's flat and straight like this, so I'm going to get going with that. All right, got the edges slicked up that I wanted to get slicked up. I didn't do these yet where I'm going to stitch yet, because obviously I've got to get those put together and slick them as one piece of leather. So I'm going to get it glued up, and then I'm going to let that tack up, get my pins in there so I can get it all lined up, and then I will get to stitching. All right, we'll let that glue tack up, and then we will get to sticking this thing together. Okay, my glue is all tacked up, so now I'm going to do like I normally do and put my pins through there. Once you put the glue on there, the glue kind of closes up some of those holes, so I like to do this to open that hole up and then get my sides lined up. Now I'm going to skip about 20 on this try, every 20 holes on both sides, and then I'll get them lined up. All right, I got all my holes lined up, got my seam stuck together, and it's a little crooked, but we'll get it all fixed up once I get it all stitched up. So what I'm gonna do now is get my needles laced up with some of this white nylon thread. It is a waxed nylon thread, polyester thread. And I'm gonna peel off about 5 times the length, maybe a little bit more. 5 times the length of the seam, because when you're lacing through these holes, I might even do more than that. When you're lacing through these holes, that takes up space, takes up thread. So you want to have enough, not just to do the length of it, but you need to go zigzag the whole way. The shortest distance between 2 points is obviously a straight line, and it's not a straight line from one end to the other. It is a very, very crooked one. All right, hopefully that is enough. I'll get this clamped to the table and get stitching. All right, I like to start back one hole from the end and then go to the end hole and then go back. So my first couple holes are actually going to get way more thread than they need, but it's going to make it a lot stronger. Okay, it's all stitched up. It's going to run a little heat along there. That'll burn off any fuzz, because I did notice there is a little fuzz there. And it'll also help slick down that wax a little bit. Now my seam is not straight. That'll be taken care of with some wet molding. But the thing I want to do right now is see how well this fits in there. Yeah, and with a little bit of wet molding, that'll work just fine. And I'll be able to get that seam straightened out. And it does sink down in there farther than what it should. It's really tight right now, but once I wet mold it, it'll be okay. And then the next thing I got to do is, well, I'm going to do that right now, is I'm going to get this thing tucked in there. So I don't want the gun in it, because I'm going to have this thing flex. And see if I can lace it through there. Might have to get the whole thing wet down a little bit so it'll slide in there a little easier, and it'll stretch a little easier, but it will go. I'll make it go. All right, I had to do a little bit of sanding there to get these edges evened up, and that's going to make it a little bit smaller. So now I'm going to get it re-dyed because I've sanded through some of that dye. So I'm just going to touch up that edge. Then I'm going to get some more gum track on there and get it slicked up again. Okay, now I'm going to get the gun all wrapped up in paper towels and plastic and then get it tucked in there to its final shape, I hope. And again, I want little to no retention on it, so it might take a little bit of muscle work. Okay, I have got it in there. Got it wet molded, and we used very hot water on it, so it really softens the leather up. Sometimes a little too soft, because I think I got some marks in there that I did not intend, but they're there now. It is a very tight fit. I probably could have made my slots just a little bit wider so it would fit in there a little better, but I do have the gun wrapped with several layers of paper towel and the plastic bag on there. I've got plenty of room there, I think, for the holster to slide over the bullet loops on the belt. I do not have the hammer thong put on there yet. I can do that later. That's not a problem. The thing I wanted to do was make sure I got everything as straight as I could, get it looking just as good as I could, because this thing is going to sit up and dry now, and it's going to dry considerably harder than what the original leather was. It was kind of a job to get that thing tucked down in there, but I got it where it needs to be, I think. And now I just got to let it dry, and I have a fear that it's going to dry dark like this, or maybe a little bit lighter than this, but that's not really what I wanted. But I mean, it's always something, and I'm my own worst critic. It'll look good as a holster. It might not look as good as the movie holster, because that's what I'm going for. I'm going for a movie holster, so it has to look like the one in the movie. Now, when I get things like the Hand of God rig and the Flames of Hell rig, those are patterns that I know have been proven because they were the ones that were made for the movies. And it's one of the reasons I like doing the movie rigs, is because for some of them, the more modern ones, I have the luxury of being able to get the ones from the maker who made them for the movie, and I know they're 100% correct. When I'm trying to make one from screenshots I get from the movie, it's a little iffy. But that's my goal, is to go for the movie ones, the historic ones, the actual ones owned by, you know, Billy the Kid or Wild Bill Hickok or whoever. I don't know if they're the correct ones, because there's stories in the past of, you know, a relative, whether it's a widowed wife or a cousin or whatever, say, hey, this was so-and-so's rig, you know, and they sell it for a whole lot of money. And then they go out and buy another one and say, hey, this was so-and-so's rig. And things like that kind of get messed up. But I can watch the movie and I can see the holster and I can say, I'm going to try to make the best one I can as a reproduction of that. I'm not trying to say this is the one from the movie, because this is evidence right here, the video, that I am not doing that. I just want to get something that looks pretty close to the movie rig. And this one will probably be okay. Like I said, I'm my own worst critic, so anyways, we're going to let this thing dry, and then I'll get the hammer thong on it, and then I'm going to call it good. All right, it's time for the hammer thong to go on there. Once this dries, anyways. Okay, I've got me a piece of lace all dried up here, or all dyed up here anyways. So I'm going to get it laced into these holes, and this gets to be a little tricky, as it always is. But I do have tools to help me reach in there and get this thing and pull it through. Got me some, I believe these are forceps. So now what I want to do before I do that is I want to get the firearm in here and find out where it needs to be, so I can put my hole in the hammer thong. And if I need to tighten it up any, I can. I'm just going to cut a rectangular hole. Now, I already tried it out on the end here and it worked out pretty good. So I think that's what I'm going to go ahead and do on this end. Okay, now I do have a little bit of slack there, not much, and I think I'm going to leave that just like that, because That's just about perfect for it, I think. Now I got to get my slots cut in there for the blood knot. So I'm going to put that in there, hook my thong over the hammer there. Like I said, in the movie, I cannot see a hammer thong on this holster, so I don't know if there's one on it or not, but like I said, it's a cross draw. He usually wears this one when he's riding a horse, and it makes sense to me to have a hammer thong on it, because with that constant bouncing around, you don't want this thing to fall out, and the hammer thong will keep it from doing that. All right, it's on there. It's a little tight right now. It'll loosen up over time, but there it is. This is the 1872 open top holster, my version of it that Tom Selleck wears in Crossfire Trail. The color did not come out like I wanted it to, and it's because I did my dyeing and top coat process different than I normally do. And like I said, I did not stick with what I knew, so next time I do one of these, if I want a lighter color, I'm going to do it like I normally do. Dye it, let it dry, and then hit it with leather balm with Atom Wax. If I want one that's a little bit darker or really kind of an aged look, I may do it this way, because I know the results now of doing it this way. And I like the results of doing it the other way with the Schofield holster. Everything turned out pretty nice. It turned out closer to the color I wanted than this one did, but it's already done and there's not much I can do about it. The look of it is good. The color is wrong, I think, anyways. Anyways, there's my version of the 1872 open top 3-loop Mexican loop holster that Tom Selleck wore in the movie Crossfire Trail. Next, I'm going to have to do the belt for this, and I think I got the opening in there just right for that to fit over top of the cartridge loops. A very interesting belt. It is leather and cloth, and I do have some of the cloth belt that I'm going to make this thing out of. I just got to figure out a whole lot of other stuff. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you could, reach up here and hit this button to check out some of my other videos, and then hit this button down here to subscribe if you haven't already, or subscribe and then check out some other videos. Either way, thanks for watching.